Hey, it's Ashley from Westcott, and today I'm going to show you everything you need to know to get started with studio lighting. If you're comfortable with your camera but feel totally lost when it comes to using flash or setting up your lights, don't worry, this video was made just for you. I'll walk you through exactly how I approach the shoot, everything from evaluating the space to dialing in the camera settings, to choosing what modifier and building your lighting setup. Starting with just one light, I'll show you how to shape a light with a purpose and create results that you're proud of, so let's get started. Before I even touch my camera or set up a light, the first thing I do is always evaluate the space I'm shooting in, especially the ambient light. I take a good look around and ask myself, what kind of lights are already here? Are there window lights bringing in natural light? Are the overhead lights on? Are there any decorative or background lights that could be affecting my photo? In the studio I was working with, there was quite a bit going on. Window lights, overhead lights, and some string lights hanging in the background. One of the first decisions I need to make is whether I want to work with the ambient light or control and overpower it. If I choose to work with it, I can treat it as a secondary light source, like a fill light, to help brighten and fill in the shadows for a more natural look. But if I want a more dramatic image, I can overpower the ambient light entirely and let my strobe light the entire scene. For this first setup, I'm going to show you how to work with the ambient light. To start, I wanted a bright natural look, where I let the window light act as a fill light that helped lift the shadows without needing a secondary flash or reflector. I decided to turn off the overhead lights though, since they had a mixed color temperature that didn't match the rest of the scene. But I did like the warm glow of the string lights in the background. They added just a little bit of depth in the atmosphere, so I left those on. My strobe is actually daylight balanced at 5500 Kelvin, which matches the color temperature of the window very well. So what I will want to do is white balance to that. Once I evaluated my scene, the next step is to bring in the light. For the shoot, I'm using Westcott's FJ400 SE, which provides the perfect amount of power for a studio setup. I'm also using the FJX3M trigger, which lets me control all the flash settings directly from the camera, which makes making adjustments quick and easy without needing to walk over to the light. I wanted to keep things simple and clean, so I used a single strobe and I modified it with a 2x3 clickbox softbox to give me a soft but directional light. I chose this rectangular modifier shape intentionally since it complements the shape of the window and helps the lighting feel more natural in the space. I placed the light on the opposite side of the window so that the window light could act as a fill light and brighten up the shadows. This kind of setup works really well if you want a clean, natural looking scene without the light looking too flat. So now let's talk about camera settings, because this is something that can really impact how your light and ambient blend together. Every shoot is a little bit different, and depending on your space, your subject, and the final look that you're going for, it can change. But here's how I approach it. First up is the aperture. Most of the time in the studio, I'm shooting around 5.6 or 8 because I like having a lot of depth of field, so I can see the entire subject in focus. But for this look, I decided to open up my aperture around f2.8. I wanted to blur out the busy background just a little bit and soften the texture of the brick wall behind my subject. More importantly, opening up the aperture allowed for a lot more natural window light into the image, which helps brighten up the shadows and give the image an overall more natural look. Next, I set my ISO, and I always try to keep this as low as possible to avoid any unnecessary noise. But for me, that means ISO 100, which is the lowest my camera will do. And if I need more exposure, I can always raise it up a little bit, but the combination of the window light and the flash, I don't think I will need to do that. Next, I adjust my shutter speed. Shutter speed is what controls how much ambient light, like window light or light from the background, shows up in your photo. The slower the shutter speed, the more ambient light you'll see in your photo. For this setup, this is actually a really important setting. Normally, if I'm not using any ambient light and just relying on flash, I would set my shutter speed to the camera's maxing speed, which for me is usually around 1/200th of a second. But in this case, I want to let more of that soft window light and the glow from the string lights into the image, so I'm slowing my shutter speed down to 1/80th of a second. Here's a helpful tip. When you're using both natural light and flash, try setting your camera for the ambient light first before you turn on any of your flash. This way you can get the natural light looking just the way you want, and then just add in your flash to light your subject. Once my camera settings were locked in, the only thing left to do was adjust the flash power. If my subject looks a little too bright, I would simply just lower the flash power, and if it's too dark, I would just bump it up a little bit. This gives you a lot of control and flexibility, especially when working with just one light. Using a single strobe with a soft modifier and balancing the ambient light is a great starting point for learning studio lighting. It's important to keep practicing with your light, and the more you use them, the easier it becomes to get the right exposure quickly. Over time, you start to realize what power settings you need to use and how much you need to adjust your lights based on your scene. Now I want to show you how to create a completely different look, something a lot more dramatic by overpowering the ambient light in the scene. For this shot, I wanted to photograph my model a lot closer to the window, but the natural light coming in was creating a harsh, unflattering highlight. So instead of working with that light, I decided to block it out and take full control. So I closed the windows and adjusted the settings to give me more control. I also lowered the height of my strobe so my model could sit on the floor comfortably. I'm still using the same light and modifier as before, but now the only key difference is my camera settings. Since I no longer want to use the ambient light. And remember from earlier, shutter speed controls how much ambient light you want to allow into your scene. And since I wanted to block that light out completely, I needed a faster shutter speed. So I set my camera to its maximum sync speed, which for me, again, is 1/200th of a second. That change helped reduce a lot of the ambient light, but I was still seeing a little bit in the shot. So I increased my aperture to 5.6 to let in less light overall. Just keep in mind when you raise your aperture that you have to raise your flash power as well. So I bumped up the flash power to match. I kept my ISO at ISO 100 to keep the image clean from noise and reduce light sensitivity. Here's a helpful trick when you're trying to overpower ambient light. Turn your flash off and take a test shot. If the image is completely black, that means your camera isn't picking up any of the ambient light, and only light it's going to capture is from your strobe, which is a great way to double check that you're fully controlling your ambient light. Now that you have a basic understanding of how the camera settings impact your lighting, let's talk about another key part of the studio photography: light modifier choice and light placement. When you're using studio lights, one of the most important decisions you'll make is how to shape and control your light, and that's where modifiers come in. A modifier is an attachment you can put on the front of your light to change how it behaves. It can affect the size, direction, and softness of the light, which all play a big role in the final look of your photo. In general, the larger the modifier, the softer the light will be. Soft light gives you a smooth, gradual shadows and often is a lot more flattering for portraits because it wraps around the subject's face. This kind of light is great for beauty work or clean, natural-looking images. Light modifiers like softboxes and umbrella are also a great tool. On the other hand, small modifiers like a bare flashbulb create a hard light source with more defined shadows, higher contrast, and more dramatic, edgy feel. Hard light can be great for creating stylized or athletic portraits where you want to emphasize a lot of texture and definition. There is no right or wrong option, it really comes down to the mood and the style that you want to create. For this next look, I used Westcott's ClickBox Octa 42-inch softbox. I chose the Octa softbox because it creates a beautiful round-like catchlight in the subject's eyes and gives a much more natural and pleasing look. The size also gave me soft, even light with a nice gentle fall off around the edges. And if you're ever unsure what kind of light a certain modifier produces, here is a simple trick. Try pointing it at a plain, solid color wall and take a test shot. This lets you clearly see how soft or hard the light is, and rather there's a hot spot in the center and how that fades on the edges. Doing this with a few modifiers is a great way to learn how each modifier affects your scene. Once you've chosen your light source and modifier, the next big factor to think about is light placement. Whether you position your light in relation to your subject has a huge impact on the final image. Even small changes, like moving the light a few inches or adjusting the angle, can completely change the mood of the highlights and the shadows. The first thing to consider is distance. The closer your light is to your subject, the brighter and softer the light will appear. That's because the light source becomes larger compared to the subject. By bringing the light in closer, it creates a more noticeable fall off, meaning the light quality will gradually fade, creating a more depth and contrast. On the flip side, if you move the light further away, the shadows can start to look a little bit harsher, and the light will appear more even across the scene. But you may lose some of that soft, wrapped-around light quality. Next, you need to think about height. A good rule of thumb is to place your light source slightly above your subject's eye line. This mimics natural light like sunlight or window light and helps create flattering shadows under the cheekbones and jawline. If the light is too high, you might get some unwanted shadows in the eyes or under the nose, but if it's too low, the light can look unnatural. Now let's talk about where you place your light around your subject. Placing your light directly in front of your subject gives you very flat lighting, which is great for beauty shots but can lack dimension. And if you move your light off to the side, you start to introduce shadows, which add depth and shape to your subject's face. A simple way to think about light placement is this. The closer your light is to the center right above or next to your camera, the more even and flat the light will be. This setup reduces the shadows and gives you a clean, uniform look, which is great for beauty or product shots. But if you start to move the light off to the side, higher or lower, or even slightly behind your subject, you begin to introduce more shadows. These shadows help shape the face and add dimension, which often creates a more flattering and dramatic look. An easy way to visualize this is imagine your subject in the center of a circle, and your light is moving around them. As the light rotates from straight on to 45 degrees to the side or even behind your subject, you'll see the shadows shift and the mood of the photo changes. I still think about this with every setup. If I want more drama and shadows, I move the light further around the subject. And if I'm getting too many shadows, I bring it back forward towards the camera. It's a simple concept, but it's a powerful way to control the mood of your portraits. One important thing to keep in mind is when working with directional light, especially when it comes to strong shadows, is your subject's pose. Make sure that you're angled towards the light so their face is getting properly lit. And if they turn too far away, parts of their face may fall into deep shadows. For the shoot, I wanted to capture a clean beauty shot of my model, which means I needed a softer light with minimum shadows. To achieve that, I placed my light directly above my lens, keeping it close to the center for even flattering lighting. But I did make sure to raise the light high enough to introduce some shadows under her chin and cheekbones, and just add a little bit dimension without losing that nice even lighting. I often choose this lighting placement for beauty work because it allows my model to move more freely while staying evenly lit, which helps me capture a variety of poses without adjusting the light. Even with a strong lighting setup, you may run into a few common issues, but most of these are easy to fix with small adjustments. If your image is looking flat, try moving your light slightly off to the side or raising it higher. This creates more natural shadows and adds shape to the face. If you're getting strange or unflattering shadows, your light might be too low. Try raising it up above your subject's eye line for a more natural look. Raising it above your subject's eye line and angling it down usually gives more flattering results, with soft shadows under the cheekbone and chin. If the lighting feels too harsh or contrasty, try adding a reflector or a fill light to the opposite side of your main image. This can soften shadows and balance out the exposure. And if your subject's eyes look a little dull or lifeless, check for catch lights. A clean catch light can bring a lot of life to your image. And usually you can fix this by lowering your light slightly or having your subject tilt their chin up just a little bit. Up to this point, I've only used simple one light setups, and that is completely intentional. I truly believe that when you're starting in studio lighting, the best thing you can do is start with one light and master it. Focus on understanding what your main light is doing before adding in any more lights. This can help you see how light shapes your subject and gives you more control of the final image. Once you feel confident with just your key light, you can introduce a reflector, which is a simple and effective way to add in fill lights with shadows. Reflectors are affordable and easy to use and can make a noticeable change in your portraits. If you decide to start adding in additional lights, make sure you're doing it with intention. For this next look, I want to create a polished, clean 3-light portrait. So I start with my main light, a 42-inch Clickbox Octa softbox, to give me soft, even lighting. And I positioned this off to the side of my subject to sculpt the face with shadows, adding dimension and shape. But I didn't want those shadows to be too dark, so I brought in a second FG400 SE. And this time I modified it with a 2x3 Clickbox softbox. The second light acted as a soft fill, brightening up the shadows of the area just to keep enough detail without flattening out the image. And then finally, I add a rim light to help separate my subject from the backdrop and add a little bit of highlight to her face. To control the spread of this light, I use a 1x3 Clickbox softbox. This helped keep the lights focused and preventing the spilling across the entire scene. Each light in this setup had a specific purpose. The key light shaped the subject, the fill light softened the shadows, and the rim light added separation. Adding lights can absolutely help you create more dynamic dimensional images, but always remember, don't add lights just because you can. Every light should serve a clear purpose. Often the cleanest and most professional looking portraits come from a simple, well thought out setup, where every element is intentional. And that's it. I hope this gave you a solid foundation for getting started with studio lighting. And remember, lighting doesn't have to be complicated. Just start with one simple light. Once you're comfortable, you can build upon those skills and create even more dynamic setups. I know this was a lot of information, so if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.